Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonkson, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Before we jump into it, just want to remind you that we've got churchboom.org to always check that out. It's got tons of resources, Church Boom University, our coaching, executive coaching, Church Boom Network, lots of great things to check out. But today we're talking with my friend Andreas. He's from New Mexico, and we're talking about momentum. And momentum is a great thing, but it has a way of revealing insecurities on your team and also hiding weaknesses that you have as a pastor, as a leader, or even in your systems and strategy. So it's about momentum, and we all want it, but it also it exposes and shows us what momentum can do about insecurity and weaknesses. It's a great, great podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, let's jump into it. And how can I help you today? What's on your mind?
Great. Thanks for your time, Pastor Chris. So a couple of different things that I've seen and that I thought maybe could be helpful to other pastors that, whether they're stepping into an existing church or planning a church. One is kind of what I've experienced here is that after you step in and there's an initial team, or maybe you're starting off and you have your initial team leads, and as you grow and progress and, you realize there's another level that you want to get to, a level of excellence, or you just need to change your needs because the congregation's bigger, different things like that. How do you find your next level leaders? And then how do you segue from your existing to maybe the next skill level?
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about finding those next level leaders. I think are so important because foundationally, the church doesn't outgrow its leadership. So, we never, that's nothing new. I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard before. But one thing I always talk about is if this is the growth line and this is the leadership line, they kind of move together like this, and what happens is churches will say all the time, man, it's like we grow, and then we come back down. We grow, we come back down. And I always say that the growth line and the leadership line will separate, but they only separate for a very short time. And either leadership comes up and meets it or growth comes back down and meets it. Mm-hmm. So the growth line and the leadership line will separate, but they only separate for a very short time because either leadership comes up and meets it or growth comes back down and meets it. And what you're saying is, hey, man, we're experiencing growth and we're seeing God do awesome things. We always want to make sure that leadership line comes up. And so one of the questions you asked was, how do we know when we are looking for that next level leader? I think there's a couple things. One, and I think this is the most important thing is, I think a lot of churches leave leadership development to chance. And then we look and we find a faithful person and we say, oh man, hey, he's the next leader. And then we wait a little while, we find another person, oh, he's the next leader, and then we just kind of shove them into a leadership position. I think a church has to be strategic and answer the question, how do we develop leaders around here? You're an intuitive leader. So you could look at someone and say, I think that guy's a leader. But the problem is, Andreas, is that intuitiveness is never duplicatable. You can't duplicate intuitiveness. It's just a gift that God gives you. So because you can't duplicate it, you're expecting your staff to be intuitive as well, and they're not going to be. So you have to create a system by which, how do we develop leaders in this church? One of the things there's two things I really love is getting the staff to start thinking about two things. And there's a lot more that goes with it. And you and I have talked about this before. I love when every staff member has a leadership circle. So they got 5, 6, 7 leaders, and once a month they go through a couple chapters in a book. They do that for 4 or 5 months. They learn, they grow together. If one of the 5 or 6 people kind of gets flaky, you kind of remove them and bring someone else in. If after one book you're like, man, I'm going to take this group of 5, 6, 7 to another book, you might take them through another book. You might find that one of them really do well as a leader. Maybe they could go lead their own group. But the point is, it's almost like creating a farm league. Imagine you got 7 staff members and they're all got 5 or 6 people in a group. That's 35 to 45 different people in a leadership group where you're just going through a book together, learning together. Some of those people in that circle are already on a leadership team. Some of them are not. They're just people that you see something in. And now your team is monthly investing in these either current leaders or potential leaders. Now, once you have that circle and you start dividing up circles and maybe go from 4 circles to 6 to 8, and that takes off. And you can learn all this at Church Boom University. We have the whole master class on it at Church Boom University. But you also have a second level that's called apprenticing, which I think is really important, where maybe out of that circle or somewhere, you find that one, no more than 2 people throughout a year where you're like, that person clearly is set apart, has a gifting, has an ability. I'm going to keep them in a circle, but I'm going to meet with them separately. And I'm going to spend the next 6 months to a year, once a month, twice a month, whatever. I'm going to spend one-on-one with them, and I'm going to apprentice them. Just like if you want to be in the union and you're a plumber, you got to be it's funny that you have to apprentice to be a plumber in the union, but we don't do that in the church. You got to do that if you want to be a lawyer. You got to do that if you want to be a doctor. Right. You got to do that in almost any field. You want to do that in baseball, you got to go through the ranks, the farm league, but we don't do that in the church. Although Timothy talks about it in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, it talks about it. So I would personally, as you're developing and looking for leaders, create circles and then make sure your staff is always apprenticing 1 to 2 people. And here's the key: to do what they do better than they do it. Mm. You want a children's pastor to raise up 1 to 2 people to do what they do at least as good as they do it, if not better. Because I always say, you're 1 disaster away, 1 pneumonia away, 1 person getting sick for 3 months away from a disaster if you don't have people that you're apprenticing. We got to do that. That to me, that's a paradigm shift for most people on your team. Because most people on your team are like, I run the youth department, I make sure that we go on events, and I make sure we put on a youth service. And I bet you development of leader does not come out of their mouth. But it needs to come out like, look, this is what I do. We develop leaders and we develop our teams. And that is a big part of what we do. So I think personally, you need to have a system. You can't leave it to intuitiveness or to chance.
I love that. I love the idea of a developmental league, so to speak, a constant pipeline, raising up people to the leadership. Just kind of a add-on is like I'm just going to use a technical team for an example. Yep. Someone a little more technical. So, we had someone who was steady, they're task-driven, right? And recognizing that there was a certain ceiling there with them. And then someone came newer to the church who had a higher ceiling, being task-driven, a gatherer, and their technical ability was higher. How have you seen kind of that switch over without hurting feelings happen, going to that more technical person, or so to speak?
Yeah, when you kind of feel like someone's coming up and they're actually better, and
exactly,
that is a difficult one. I think there's a couple things. One, in a growing church, I think it's important to always remind staff and key leaders, look, I need you to grow. There's 2 things I think you got to remind them. Number 1, you got to keep growing, because if you're not careful, the organization will outgrow you. Mm. So, hey, you were, a children's pastor. You're great when we started and we had 100 people and we had 15 kids. We're now 500 people and we've got, we've got 100 kids. And you're running it like it's still 15 kids. I need you to keep growing. I think one of the greatest conversations, to be unclear is to be unkind. And to be clear, we're growing. I need you guys to keep up with the growth. You got to develop. You got to read books. You got to get coaching. You got to be consistent about it. I need you to keep up with it. That's number 1. Second thing is, I think that's a cultural thing where it's like, man, you got to keep up. Secondly is, I think it's also good to have a culture that says that we're fast, fluid, and flexible.
Mm.
What that says to the team is, hey, we're fast, fluid, and flexible. Oh, okay, Pastor Andreas, what does that mean? That means that we are, we're going to change things, and we're not going to think about it for 6 months. If it needs to be changed, we're going to change it. We're fluid. Hey, we might be better in this seat on the bus than in this seat on the bus. We're not going to get so married to titles around here that our feelings get hurt because we're asked to sit in a different seat. And we're flexible. We're flexible. It's like, if that didn't work, we're going to try this. That didn't work, we're going to try this. We are fast, fluid, and flexible. I think you have to get it into the water because that doesn't change from 100 to 300, 300 to 500, 500 to 800, 800 to 1,000. It doesn't change. Mm-hmm. You get certain leaders that come in. This one just was good at 200, but they're not good at 600 or 800 or 1,000, whatever. So it's like, man, you got to make that change, and that's hard to do. So I think I would back up. My answer is backing up and going, first, let's make sure everybody knows you got to keep growing. Secondly, let's make sure that everybody understands that we're fast, fluid, and flexible, that switching to a different seat on the bus, we need to be okay with it. And one of the things I would say, you can say it when no one's feeling it. Mm-hmm. Like maybe no one feels it today. So you look at your staff, maybe today you have a staff meeting and you say, hey, look, we're open to change. We're fast, fluid, and flexible. We don't get married to the titles, all that stuff that I just talked about. And you got to keep growing or something's going to happen. But I think it's important for you to be able to tell them, if we need to make a change, something needs to change, I need to move another bus. What we don't want is a lot of drama that goes around it. Okay, I got to talk to Linda. And I know Linda's going to not like it. Then I talk to Linda. Then Linda gets upset. Then Linda talks to 2 or 3 people. Then she comes back to me. Then we have 4 more conversations. Then 8 weeks go by and she starts feeling better. And then by month 4, she's okay with it. Like, you can say that when it's not happening, but I'd say that now. Like, let's not be that staff that every time something shifts or moves, we know we got to buckle up for anywhere from 0 to 6 months of drama. Let's not be that staff. And I think to say that up front, I'm not saying it solves everything, but what you're doing is you're reinforcing all these things to change the culture. To say, we're not going to be that kind of church that anytime a change comes up, it's big drama, everybody gets upset. We're just going to, I'm not out to hurt anybody's feelings, but we're going to be flexible and we're going to make changes as we need to make changes. I think it's more of a culture thing.
I love that idea of setting the expectation ahead of time. That way it's not surprising. It's not in the moment and not as impacting when you do get to that point and have to make those changes. It's less of a shocker for them. I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah, you said a good phrase there. It's not in the moment. Right now, if it's not in the moment, say it. And then in a month again, we say it again. And we just keep reminding anytime you have an opportunity, hey, don't forget we're fast, fluid, and flexible. Hey, don't forget that we got to always be growing. Don't forget. I think if you say it in the moment, it's not going to work. And then some people are like, oh man, so you're telling people they got to grow because they got to keep up with the organization? That's mean. I'm like, no, actually, I think that's kind. To be unclear is to be unkind. But what mean to me is to walk in and say, you're out because you didn't keep up, but you never told them to keep up. That to me is mean. I think it's a lot nicer to say, hey man, we're going to keep growing and I want you to come with us, but I need you to, keep growing again. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And so 100%. That to me is way more kind than just coming in and going, well, I got to make a move with you. It's like, no, hey, Tom, we talked about this a year ago. Yeah. And I don't think you've gotten any coaching. I don't think you've gotten any development. I don't think you've gotten any help. You're not developing as a leader. We signed you up for this. You didn't take advantage of that. I got to make a move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, I see the super important part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So be clear with them. I think to be unclear I think that's actually being mean.
Yeah. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
I got another one for you. How do you prepare your church and your congregation, including staff, but even just the attendees, for breaking your next growth barrier, like you kind of touched on it a little bit there on this past question, but what 50 to 100 looks like, and 100 to 300, and how do you kind of prep that road before you get there?
Yeah, the biggest thing you want to prep on any of it is your key leaders, your board, and your staff, because people will follow the influencers. So, not to say that you don't want to say anything to the church. I'm not saying that. You want to remind them that we're about growth. You want to remind them we're about changing lives, all that stuff. But where your focus and energy has to be is in your board leaders, key staff, key volunteers, whatever. They're the ones, because if they're on board, then most of the people will be on board in the church, because they're the key influencers. When you're talking about looking towards growth barriers, people have a way of viewing the size of the church in which they first came. So if they arrived and it was 100, in their head, there's still 100. And if it doesn't feel like 100 because it's now 300 or 500, then they kind of judge it like, why don't I get to talk to the pastor anytime I want? And why can't I just do this? And why can't I just do that? And well, it's different now. And so there is that constant struggle. But the key is to make sure that the key leaders, board, and all that, the staff, that they know that that you're talking with them, that you're preparing them, but not only verbally preparing them, but also growing them and having them look at their departments. For instance, it's like, hey, children's department, the way you ran it at 100 might not work at 300. You might need more leaders. You might need a totally different org chart. You might need to look at things completely different. I think you've got to start not only mentally and verbally preparing them, but practically, like sit down and say, hey, how you operate a children's department with 20 kids or 100 kids is vastly different. So let's look at that. I think that's how you kind of prepare them. Always remember, Andreas, that language shapes behavior and behavior shapes culture. Language shapes behavior, behavior shapes culture. So if you're trying to shape a culture, go back to the language. That's why I say, hey, don't forget, guys, we're fast food and flexible. That's a language that's shaping a behavior, that's shaping a culture. Find some language, like even in this situation, like, hey, guys, we have to grow and adapt. That's a great one. Like, yeah, we're going to grow and adapt. Okay, so what looks at 100 is going to look different at 500. So you're going to have to do it. Don't forget, we grow and adapt. We grow and adapt. We grow and adapt. Like it's always good to find 2 or 3 phrases that help kind of support what you're trying to create. So I think on the earlier question, fast food and flexible is awesome. But if we're talking about, hey, go from 100 to 500, how do we prepare? We grow and adapt. What worked at 100 won't work at 500. It won't. You have one McDonald's, and then you and I own one McDonald's. Now we own 20. It's different, way different how we have to operate. Everything has to change how we operate it. Same thing. I got 20 kids. I got 100 kids. Okay, it's different now. And they've got to grow as we grow and adapt. Like, okay, I got to change that. I got to fix that. I got to do this different. I'll go to a church and I'll watch it, work with them, and they're going from 200 to 400 to 500, 600. And I'll talk with the children's pastor. I'm like, you're still running it like you're 200. That's why you're having problems and you're not keeping up. And I don't want you to get lost in this organization, but you're about to get lost if you don't keep up. You're not changing. That's structure. Structure has to change. When you got 20 kids, you got 200 kids in the children's department. Your structure has to change. You got one McDonald's, you got 20 McDonald's. Structure has to change. Your Amazon delivering 8 packages or 8 million packages. Your structure completely changes. And most people, they hold on to an old structure in a new dynamic.
Oh, I've totally seen that. There was a time I was pastoring a church, and I had someone come in and help me evaluate what's going on. And during conversation, as he was meeting with the influencers, it came out that they actually enjoyed the smaller church because of, everybody knew everybody on a first name basis. It was a more intimate environment. And we realized hey, that's a really big deal to stopping our growth because they like it small. They want to keep it small, and not enough of the conversation of reminding them, hey, our goal is not to stay small. Our goal is to grow. And, you see that in the corporate world, they're always pushing to the troops, so to speak, hey, this is the track we're on. This is who we are, so that they don't stay in that stagnant mindset. So yeah, I've definitely seen
Yep.
that happen before.
Yeah. Yep. Oh man, that's so true. And one thing I taught recently at this event that I was at, we were talking about momentum. You're growing, you're getting momentum. I used the word momentum. Momentum does two really interesting things. Momentum reveals insecurity and it hides weaknesses.
Mm,
So it reveals the insecurity. Yeah, we're starting to get momentum. You're getting insecure. You're feeling like your position will be threatened. You're getting insecure that you're going to lose your friends. You're getting insecure that you're going to be outshined. It's all sorts of insecurities that get revealed, but it also hides weaknesses. Yeah, we're growing, but and so we don't deal with this problem over here because we're growing. Hey man, don't worry about it. But you're not connecting people fast enough. Your groups aren't solid. Your ministries aren't solid. But you don't matter. It doesn't matter because man, we have great momentum. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to hide that weakness, and eventually, the weakness is going to create the problem. It's gonna bring back that momentum back down because you didn't deal with the weakness. So you can have a weakness of leadership, a weakness in your small groups, a weakness of we're not engaging people, a weakness in whatever. The list goes on and on and on of the weaknesses that you can have. But momentum hides it because everybody's just excited. We're growing. Like, yes,
you're
but
right.
you've got a lot of weaknesses over here, and they're going to show up soon. Or so it's revealing insecurity and it's hiding weaknesses. And you just have to be careful knowing that that's happening because your people. I was recently at a church speaking. They asked me to come speak to their volunteer group. Been coaching them. They've probably gone from, I don't know, maybe 180. And I think they've bumped the last 3 weeks, been about 600. We've been doing some executive coaching with them. And I met with their volunteer leadership team and we talked about the momentum. Like here's some of the stuff. We secretly want the church to stay small.
Mm,
We're threatened by new people coming in because we're afraid of us losing our position. We're like, there's all these things that I think as pastors, we're just excited there's bigger crowds.
mhm.
We're not realizing what's happening in people's hearts, and we have to be aware of that.
No, that's great. That's a great observation.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more? I want to be just
Yeah,
respectful of your
absolutely.
time.
One more.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. So, all these kind of touch on each other, but as the church is growing and different generations are now in play, what's the best way to kind of pivot from maybe like I'm 50 now. There was a certain way that was effective to reach people, to
Mhm.
invite them to your church, to evangelize, and now the culture has changed, technology has changed, the world has changed. What is the kind of best way now to reach people, invite people to your church in today's culture?
Mm. I I personally, I do think there's a couple thoughts. I do think that the front door of the church has changed. I think the front door used to be the actual physical door. Then I think the front door changed to the website. And now I think it's also including social media. Um, where I think those things come into play, personally, I don't look at them as, except for maybe an online church. Those things are more about awareness and they're more about who we are. So most people, hey, if you're new to an area, you're going to Google a couple churches, depending on what you see on their online service, their social media, what they're celebrating, what they're all about, what their website looks like, will determine whether or not you come. But that's a person that just decided on their own to go to church. So I do think that there is a power in those areas where I think we have to present ourselves well. I mean, I look at some social media and some website and I'm like, buddy, man, like this is really bad, So if anybody's just Googling church to go to in whatever city, like there's no way, it's like it's horrible, and you can do better than this. And even if you don't have a big budget, you can still do better than this. This isn't a budget issue. This is a neglect issue. And so I think that is awareness and that brings validity and causes people to look at it and say, do I want to go check it out or not? I still think increasing the invite culture is always the way to go. What do we always say? What's the best kind of marketing? Word of mouth, it is. I saw a statistic recently that says 1 out of every 4 people would go to church if a friend invited them. Just think about that. So you tell your people, invite 4 people to church and 1 will come with you this week. But what's crazy is statistically, 95 out of 100, 95% of people at Christian churches in any state haven't invited anybody to church in the last 12 months. 95%.
Wow.
That's pretty bad. That is more than just a growth issue. To me, that's a discipleship issue. That's 95 out of 100 haven't invited anybody. And then, we all meet Jesus someday. And, I don't know if that's a conversation we want to have with them. Yeah, I never really invited anybody. Really? You mean in the free country where you can say anything you want about religion, you're not living in some other country where you can't talk about it. To whom much is given, much is required. You were given freedom and you did nothing. So I think it's not only a growth issue, it's a discipleship issue. Guys, this has got to change. So changing that invite culture, which I've talked about a million times. Stories you tell, the heroes you make, things you celebrate. Start celebrating people that are inviting people. Start celebrating people that got invited. Put it at the forefront of people's mind. Don't just preach about it. Do stories about it. Do videos. Do interviews. Make it a priority. That's even a person that's only been going to the church for 3 months would say, I don't know everything about this church, but I know inviting people is a big deal because one way or another, there's always a story coming out every Sunday. I think that is what starts to change people. That's how you tell stories about the behavior you want repeated. But I think it's an important part because it's more than just growth, which we all want. It's 95 out of 100 not fulfilling the Great Commission. It was the final words of Jesus. So I'm assuming, I always think your final words on your deathbed are probably the most important. Your final words on this earth, probably the most important. He said, go into all the world, and 95 out of 100 haven't invited anybody to church in the last 12 months. I think we need to fix that for growth reasons. I think we need to fix that for discipleship reasons.
Wow, I'm even preaching on that this Sunday.
Let her rip.
Commission. So I was like, wow, just hearing you, I'm convicted and stirred in my heart, and no, man, I got to rally the troops. I got to get better, even myself,
Oh, we all do, and I think it's important as lead pastors that are all listening to this, and you included, myself, all, whatever, lead pastors. One, I think telling stories, interviewing people, all that, keep that out in front. At least 2 out of every 4 Sundays, it's there's an invite story being somehow told, even if it's a testimony. This person's life got turned around. Okay, but how did you get to the church? Oh, I got invited a year ago. Oh, see, it's always connected to that invite. But I always think that as pastors, we need to weave into the message. It doesn't have to be every week, but every other week, every third week. Not a big part, not even if you're talking about evangelism. Let's say you were talking about, I don't know, patience or endurance or, handling worry, I don't know, whatever. And let's say you tell a story, and you're like, man, I was out getting my mail and I was talking to my neighbor. I've been inviting him to church for the last several weeks. And we got into this conversation. I just dropped a sentence in there. Maybe the conversation had not, we could have talked about sports. But I made sure to put that one. I went out to my mailbox and I was talking to my neighbor. I've been inviting the guy, for several times to the church. I know one day he's going to come. But we started talking about sports, and then, you're giving an illustration. What did that just tell the people? Our pastor's inviting people. And I think for us to consciously weave it in every other week, it just lets our people know that he's not only talking about, this is what he does.
That's great.
Not just when you talk about evangelism or the Great Commission. You just weave it in, just a little sentence, 1 sentence or 2 sentences kind of weaved into somewhere where it just sends a signal that that's what our pastor does too. Yeah. So I think it's an important part as lead pastors. So
yeah, I got to be really conscious of that. Yeah, it's
absolutely
been great. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope you found it helpful today, man.
Super, man. Got lots of information I want to implement ASAP,
Awesome. Awesome. Well, keep up the great work. Always here to serve and help you, man. But thanks for being on today, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Pastor Chris, and thanks for Church Boom.
Thank you for tuning in to the Fly on the Wall podcast. We hope today's episode provided you with some practical steps to lead your church to the next level. If you found this episode helpful, take a moment to leave us a review and share it with others. Remember, when the pastor grows, the church grows, and we grow pastors. We love you. We're your raving fans, and we are cheering you on. See you next week.